The galaxy had never feared humans, not once in all the long ages since the Council of Worlds first mapped the stars. To them, Earth was small, a blue speck circling an unremarkable sun. Its people? Primitive, disorganized, loud, their fleets a joke compared to the luminous dreadnoughts of the Ardent Collective or the moon-sized fortresses of the Drethi Imperium. Humanity was tolerated, not respected. Allowed a seat in the Galactic Council, one without voice, one without power. And yet, in the end, it would be humanity that made the stars tremble. It began quietly, with a war that wasn't supposed to happen. The Torga Dominion, a species of scaled giants with ships built from living metal, claimed a newly discovered system near the rim, a world rich with silver veins and frozen oceans. Earth called that same planet Canaan 4. The Dominion claimed priority rights. Earth claimed they'd already colonized it. And the Council claimed to care, but did nothing. When the first transmission came, images of a Terran mining base in flames, workers executed on live holofeeds, the Council met in solemn silence. The Chancellor of the Council, a being made of translucent crystal named Serath Kor, folded his shimmering hands and said, "This is unfortunate, but humanity must understand that expansion carries risk." "Risk?" the human ambassador Evelyn Hayes whispered. "They slaughtered civilians," Kor's voice hummed softly. "Then they should not have been there." The words echoed in the chamber, quiet and cruel. And humanity's representative, the lone voice of an entire world, stood tall against the galaxy's most powerful rulers. She spoke a single sentence that history would never forget. "You've mistaken our patience for weakness." The Council laughed. Softly, politely, as diplomats do when they think the joke isn't worth explaining. The Dominion declared war. The Council endorsed containment. And the galaxy moved on, confident that Earth would surrender within weeks. For the first few days, it seemed they were right. The Torga fleet burned through the Terran outposts in the Rim, Canaan 4, Eridani Station, Beta Lacaille. Human ships were outgunned, outnumbered, outclassed. Council observers called it an educational conflict, an example of why primitives should not reach beyond their own orbit. But something strange happened after the fifth battle. Human ships stopped running. The TSS Calgary, a Terran cruiser with half its engines crippled, refused to retreat at the Battle of Elnath Reach. Its captain, Idris Vale, ordered the ship turn to face the Dominion flagship, a living fortress that dwarfed his own vessel by 100-fold. Council monitors watched in disbelief as the human ship went dark. No shields, no thrusters, no communications. And then, just before the Torga flagship opened fire, the Calgary came alive. Every weapon it had, mass drivers, coil cannons, plasma batteries, fired at once. The Torga ship's organic hull ruptured under the assault, screaming like a dying animal as it tore apart. The blast wave destroyed both ships. No survivors. Captain Idris Vale's final transmission was short and calm. "You wanted our surrender. This is what it looks like." The Council reviewed the footage in silence. Then they classified it. The war continued. And the humans did what no one expected. They didn't fight for territory. They didn't fight for victory. They fought for each other. In every destroyed colony, survivors were rescued. Every fallen ship's black box was retrieved. Every battle, no matter how hopeless, ended with someone coming back for someone else. The Torga didn't understand it. To them, war was hierarchy, obedience, fear, and dominance. To humans, it was personal. And when a war becomes personal, surrender stops being an option. The first Council world to notice the change was Dareth Prime, a neutral relay hub, a place of commerce. Its orbit was crowded with Torga vessels and merchant ships when the sky darkened, not from clouds, but from fire. Humanity had arrived. Not diplomats, not scouts, a fleet. 70 ships, small by galactic standards, arranged in a tight, perfect formation. Their hulls bore no insignia. Their engines burned cold blue. When the comms opened, a human voice spoke, a woman's, steady and calm. "This is Rear Admiral Leon Cortez, Terran Defense Command. You've been targeting our colonies, our people. We're here to retrieve them. Step aside." The Torga Admiral laughed, his voice a guttural rasp. "You are outnumbered 6-1, little human." Cortez's reply was almost gentle. "Then it's a fair fight." What followed was not a battle. It was a lesson. The humans didn't engage in open lines like other fleets. They scattered, diving through debris fields using moons as cover, turning off transponders to vanish from sensors. They fought dirty. They fought like survivors. When the Dominion flagship tried to target them, it found its own sensor array fried by electromagnetic pulses. When its escorts moved in, they found mines in their path, mines disguised as debris, drifting lazily until they came alive. The battle lasted 6 hours. At the end of it, the Dominion fleet was gone. The Council's observers, watching from the edges of the system, sat speechless. "Impossible," murmured one Drethi commander. "They don't have that level of technology." "No," said another. "They have something worse. They have improvisation." Word spread. Across the Council's networks, across the stations, across every neutral system where smugglers and traders whispered over cheap liquor. The humans were fighting back, and they were winning. Not through might, through will. By the time the Council called an emergency session, 12 Dominion fleets had vanished. 3 Council patrol stations had gone dark, and the Torga homeworld's outer moons reported unknown signatures approaching. In the Council chamber, the delegates shouted over one another, their voices overlapping in panic. "This is madness! They'll destabilize the entire region. The humans are a Tier 2 species. They shouldn't have fleets of that size." Chancellor Sarath Kor raised a crystalline hand, and silence fell. "Enough. Humanity is acting outside the law. They must be contained." Ambassador Hayes stood alone in the center of the chamber, her uniform black, her eyes colder than the void. "Contained?" she said softly. "You mean silenced?" "Call it what you will," Kor said. "If Earth continues this rebellion, the Council will authorize full military intervention." Hayes nodded once. "Then I'll tell them to prepare." "For surrender?" Kor smirked. She met his gaze without blinking. "For visitors." That night, a strange thing happened. Every long-range scanner, every communications relay, every deep space telescope across the galaxy picked up the same anomaly. Movement. Thousands of signals, leaving Sol system in formation. The data was unclear, too far, too fast. But one thing was certain. The humans weren't defending anymore. They were coming. By the time the first scouts reached Council space, the stars over Telrune were already changing, shimmering with faint trails of blue light. When dawn rose over the capital world, the sky was filled with ships. Thousands of them! Block by block they appeared, forming perfect lines, orbit after orbit, until the Council's own fleet disappeared in their shadow. No one had seen such a sight in living memory, and on every channel a single message played, spoken in every known language of the stars. "This is Earth Command. You expected surrender. We brought an Armada instead." The Council had underestimated humanity. It would never do so again, because when the stars looked down that day, they didn't see conquerors or diplomats or soldiers. They saw what humanity had always been, a species that refused to bow, a people who, when pushed to their knees, stood taller than ever before. The war had begun, but history already knew how it would end, because there is one thing you never do in the vast cold of space. You never mistake a human silence for defeat. The morning after Earth's Armada filled the skies of Telrune, every balcony in the capital city was crowded with witnesses. The council hall's glass spires caught the pale sun and threw it back in shards across the bay. It should have looked like triumph. It looked like a funeral. On every frequency, the same phrase repeated in 100 languages, calm and unhurried. "This is Earth Command. We are here for our people. Stand aside. No threats. No countdowns. No music of victory. Just the quiet certainty of a species that had measured the distance and decided to walk it anyway." Chancellor Sarath Kor took his place at the center dais of the council chamber, crystalline hands folded, face unreadable. He looked toward the human seat, third tier, outer ring, no voting rights, and found Ambassador Evelyn Hayes already standing, posture straight, eyes steady. She did not request the floor. She did not need to. For the first time in the Council's long memory, every delegate watched the human rise. "You wish to contain us," Hayes said softly. "To make an example. That was a mistake. Humanity is poor raw material for cages. Ambassador, Kor replied, voice ringing through the hall. You will order your fleet to withdraw or be fired upon. Hayes tilted her head, almost curious. With which fleet, Chancellor? Kor really turned for the first time, to the draped windows and saw what every child on Tel Rune had seen at dawn. Council patrol arcs swallowed in the shadow of human ships. Not world killers, not city eaters. Vessels of every age and tonnage, hulls patched, engines humming, formation so precise it was art, 1,000 points of blue light in layered orbits. And between them, a thing Tel Rune had never seen. Human hospital ships. Rear Admiral Leon Cortez stood on the flag deck of the TSS Anatolia, hands wrapped around the rail, eyes moving from lane to lane as formation shifts rippled like a dancer's breath through the Armada. The Anatolia did not bristle with guns. She bristled with antennae, tugs, tenders, repair drones, everything you'd bring if your aim wasn't to conquer, but to go home without leaving bones behind. Status? Cortez asked. Humanitarian corridor established over Tel Rune low orbit, replied Commander Haruto, eyes bright with the thrill of impossible work. We've signaled neutral docking rights. Medical teams standing by. And the Dominion? Listening, Haruto said. Every Torga admiral in range has opened us on a private channel. They can't help themselves. Good, Cortez murmured. Let them hear us heal the people they refuse to see. Across the Armada, the lantern ships lit their beacons, soft white circles that pulsed in a patient rhythm. Not a war drum, a heartbeat. Refugee barges and merchant tubs drifted toward them. Drawn by the old law that lives in every spacer's bones, the vessel with the brightest light might be the only one that stops when you're in trouble. Bring the mercy and solace ahead, Cortez said. Begin intake. The first shuttle to land on Tel Rune soil bore no insignia but a red cross and a handprint in white paint. A human medic named Mara O'Keefe stepped onto the tarmac with her team and walked straight toward the row of Drethi mothers waiting with feverish children. No envoy, no speech. She did not ask for permission. She asked, "Who's first?" and began to work. By noon, human supply sleds were rolling out sacks of medicine stamped with Council serial numbers the Council had never released. By evening, Terran engineers were repairing water lines in the lower tiers, cursing and laughing and teaching a Drethi boy how to wrap a leaky joint with rubber and patience. The Council guards watched, rifles held tight. Some lowered them without orders. The Chancellor's edict against material support sounded different in the air when a child stopped crying because the fever broke. In the rafters of the chamber where law was made, the whisper moved like wind. They weren't here to burn us. They were here to embarrass our gods. Not all gods were so easily shamed. On the other side of the arm, in the cold, dark void around Canaan, the Torga Dominion regrouped. Admiral Shar of the 7th Brood knelt before his living flagship, pressing his palm to its warm, breathing hull. The ship pulsed in anger. So did he. They filled the Council sky with human metal, Shar hissed. They make us look small. The ship's cortex sang in phlegmy clicks that only a broodborn could hear. Small is not weak, hatchling. Small is how knives begin, Shar rose. Then we cut. He ordered a strike on the Terran relief lines, a surgical blow against civilian vessels. He spoke it without shame. War had taught him that shame just slowed your aim. The strike never landed, because the target he meant to cut didn't exist, on paper, on every Council registry, the ships labeled TSS Lantern. 12 through Lantern 30 were lightly armed tenders. In truth, their hulls were a shell over something else entirely. Gravity anchor arrays, silent and patient as spiders. When the Torga strike group hit the drop point, space buckled. The strike craft found themselves climbing a hill that hadn't been there, engines screaming as invisible hands pressed them away from the lane. Grav shear, the Torga pilots yowled. Unknown mass! Not mass, said a human voice on an open channel. Etiquette. It was a tugboat captain, voice dry with coffee and old wars. No FTL within 5 light seconds of a hospital ship. You were told. You are told again. His tug's name glowed in block letters on its awkward hull. Gertrude Stein. It had been old before his grandfather was born. "Turn back," he said, "or we'll make you slow." "We are Dominion," snarled a Torga wing leader. "We do not slow for prey." "That's the problem," the tug captain replied. "You never learned what you're hunting?" The anchors pulsed. Space thickened like honey. The strike craft tried to force it and tumbled instead, bleeding speed, bleeding pride. One by one, their drives dropped to sublight with the offended whine of children made to wash their hands. The convoy passed beneath them, shuttles glittering in a slow and orderly stream. When the Torga limped free, there was no gloating transmission, just a tiny green light from the tug's mast, blinking the oldest signal in spacefaring history. Mind the lane. 3 days into Earth's occupation. That wasn't. The first surprise ended. The second began. A figure stepped to the balcony of the human embassy, unused for years, built as a courtesy the council never thought they'd have to honor. Ambassador Hayes spoke into the noon glare. Cameras fed her image to every screen, every visor, every bar counter where someone could afford a drink and an opinion. "We did not come to conquer," Tel Runchi said. "We came to retrieve our people and relieve the suffering your policies created. We will do both. But we also came to call a meeting that is older than the council, the conclave of the lanterns." Silence followed, and then a ripple of laughter from a dozen delegations. "Lanterns? Old spacer superstition. Fires you light when you want luck to find you." Hayes didn't smile. "The conclave is invoked when lanes become unsafe by arrogance," she continued. "Any polity that carries the old mark, 3 lines on a circle, has the right to gather, set lanes, and require safe passage for relief vessels. You buried that law in an appendix." "We did not. And if we refuse?" Chancellor Kor asked. His voice transmitted from the chamber, polite, curious, deadly. "What jurisdiction empowers you?" "The one your founders signed when they were pilots, not princes," Hayes said. "And the one the lanes themselves enforce." As if on cue, the blue lamps of 100 human ships brightened. And then, like seeds catching light, so did a dozen council vessels that hadn't remembered their hulls, bore the old symbol beneath newer paint. Drethy salvaged skiffs, a Varnix courier, an ardent collective relay tender that still smelled faintly of oranges from a cargo spill 30 years ago. Tiny circles. 3 lines. "Unkillable customs. Your vote is not requested." Hayes finished and turned away. The council shouted. The council raged. The council issued fines and warrants and recycled speeches polished by 100 gold tongues. None of it moved a single lamp. Kor gathered his inner circle, voice lowered to a frequency that made subordinates stand straighter. "We will not be humiliated. Deploy the Oriat Wall." The Oriat Wall was the council's favorite instrument, an encirclement fleet that turned orbit into a maze and time into leverage. It had starved worlds into compliance. It had reduced proud polities to supplicants. It had never faced a species that measured time not by sieges, but by rescue windows. Cortez watched the wall slide into position with a look that would have been called pity if it hadn't been so tired. "They're going to try to keep us," she said. "As if keeping is the point." Commander Haruto's fingers danced over the hollow. "We can punch a hole?" "No punches," Cortez said. "Holes. Many small ones." She glanced at the tug captain's lane map, hand-drawn and crammed with annotations. "They taught us to mind the lane." "We'll teach them to mind 10,000, Operation?" Haruto asked. Cortez smiled, faintly breadcrumbs. It began with a cargo container, then 10, then 100, drifting neatly into the council's interdiction grid. Each pod broadcast a harmless beacon. Agricultural equipment, compressed water, power cells. The wall adjusted course to corral them. The pods complied, kindly moved exactly where the council wanted them. Then the pods unfolded into kites, their thin, dark sails catching sunlight and gravity in a calculus no admiral wanted to think about. The kites linked into chains. The chains became nets, nets that weren't barriers but suggestions, slight tugs here, ghostly nudges there, that ever so gently pushed the wall's ships out of their neat slots. The Dominion signal rose like a knife through silk, sharp, clean, impossible to mistake. It came on old distress channels, piggybacked on a medical ping wearing a stolen uniform. When it reached Tel Rune, every receiver in the human armada lit at once. Rear Admiral Leon Cortez was on her way to sleep when the room turned blue, and the map bloomed a single bright wound far from any patrol arc. She stopped in the doorway, put her hand on the bulkhead, and listened as the coordinates read themselves aloud in a voice trained not to panic. "Chevron Gate?" Commander Haruto asked, stepping up beside her. She shook her head. "Farther! Sanctuary space." The name appeared. 5 syllables that made old spacers straighten unconsciously, as if in the presence of a chapel. A monastery ring, anchored to a brown dwarf on the faint side of nowhere. It kept no weapons and kept the lanes. Pilgrims slept there. Broken ships found a berth and a kettle. If you took shelter under the wheel, you honored it later, patching cracks, replacing a bulb, leaving a note that said you were sorry for bleeding on the floor. No one attacked the wheel. Not because of law. "Because of shame," Haruto said, reading the trace. "Admiral Shar." Cortez closed her eyes for a heartbeat and saw a dark room lit by a shuttle's belly lamp, and a woman placing a wrench with the calm of someone who has seen storms and placed chairs beneath tired bodies anyway. She opened them again. She said into the circuit that reached every ship with a light. "We have a sanctuary in trouble. We do not rush. We do not grandstand. We make the road and we carry the water. Cast off lines and mind the lanes. The wheel is calling." The Armada turned as one. Hospital ships, tugs, tenders, freighters with patched decks and names painted in stubborn white. The Gertrude Stein blinked twice, impatient to be useful. The Caxton checked his old chessboard to make sure no piece would slide free. The anchor crews brought kettles to simmer and rolled extra socks. They did not tell themselves they were going to win a battle. They told themselves they were going to keep a promise. Haven's wheel did not shine. It glowed like a coal, banked carefully by hands that never stopped. Its outer rim was all gardens and laundry lines and little shrines. Its inner ring was workshops and a clinic that smelled of mint and metal. The monks, human and otherwise, wore habits of canvas. Their rules fit on a card. You arrive with trouble. You leave with less. When the Dominion ships bled into the dark from jump, their living hulls flexed in hunger. Shar's flagship drifted forward, mouthparts unfurling around the weapon blister that had made 1,000 crews swear they would never be in front of it. He hailed not for courtesy, but for craft. "Predators make words into teeth when teeth must wait, Haven," he said, voice smooth as oiled bone. "Transmit your registry. Prepare to receive inspection. Any human presence within your ring is to be surrendered to Dominion custody." Abbot Para, who had folded 1,000 sheets for the infirmary, keyed the open channel with fingers nicked and scarred from honest tools. "We are sanctuary. We keep no registries and we keep no prisoners. We have soup." Shar's laugh came in a ripple down the line. "You have choices, then. Surrender and live. Refuse and burn." In the gardens, a child looked up from pulling weeds and said, "Brother, why is the sky growling?" Brother Para put a hand on the child's hair and said, "Because it has not eaten in too long. Let's fetch bowls." The Dominion closed. No human warship stood between Shar and the wheel. There was no time to bring fleets, no dignity in begging for parley. Cortez sent a single word to the ships closest to that quiet corner of the map. "Hold fast." It was not a battle order. It was a family word. It meant, if we cannot wall them out, we will be the wall. The first to answer was not a cruiser. It was a tug, tired, stubby, paint-chalked from a decade of wake. Its captain had a cup in one hand and a pencil behind his ear. He heard the call, put the cup on a sticky console, and turned his bow as if his ship were a dog who had learned her name out of love. The Gertrude Stein slid into a lane she had never taken fast before and asked her little engine for all it would give. It gave. 2 minutes behind came the Caxton, old, slow, stubborn, pulling 3 dhows loaded with bandages and beans. The barge's captain lit the lamp above the mast and muttered, "We're coming!" Sweetheart. As if the wheel were a granddaughter who had fallen from a tree and was pretending not to cry. Behind them came workhorses. the Mora, whose engines always smelled faintly of cinnamon, the Rookery, which had a mural of birds painted across her cargo bay by 3 children while waiting out a storm, the Dorothy May, whose pilot had 1 hand and flew better than men with 6. They brought anchor crews and kitchen crews and the kind of crews who showed up when you didn't know what you needed yet. 6 minutes, Haruto reported, watching plot lines trickle toward a heart. 10 minutes, 14. Admiral, we won't get a cruiser within range for 28. Then we will have to be enough, Cortez said. She magnified the wheel. She saw laundry and the tiny square of roof where pilgrims left small things they had found in corridors so they could find their owners again. She saw prayer flags in languages the council didn't bother to recognize and therefore could not censor. She saw a monk at a window, drawing the bolt as if it might matter. "Transmit this," she said, and spoke a litany that every spacer learns for drunken comfort and transports sober like a talisman. "Sanctuary quarters by pledge are inviolate. Passageways are common ground. Kitchen is command. In the absence of law, decency will suffice." The words went out and settled where they were wanted. Char expected fear's easy flavor. He tasted bread instead, yeast and heat, and had to swallow twice to keep from gagging. He set his jaw against the domestic and ordered batteries, armed. The Gertrude Stein arrived and put her nose between the wheel and the Dominion flagship, the way a terrier plants itself between a child and a boot. Her lamp blinked 3 long, 2 short. The old signal for Sanctuary Lane under repair. "Move slow." "Sing if you can," Char fired. The shot would have cored a cutter. It slapped the tug aside hard enough to turn her hull and make her mast light flicker. The little ship skidded, stubborn and ridiculous, and corrected. She didn't fire back. She blinked again, and this time the signal meant mind your temper. "You'll bust a gear." The Caxton trundled in broadside and executed the most ungainly move an old barge can offer, a deliberate drift. He rolled until his thickest plating faced the Dominion guns and settled as if sitting on a porch step. The dows tucked up behind him like ducklings. "Human," Char spat. "You will be pulp against my hull." "Son," the Caxton's captain said in a tone that made the bridge crew glance at each other because it sounded like a memory every mouth knew differently. "My hull has heard worse." He tapped the chessboard, slid a rook, and hit a switch. Plates along the barge's spine unlocked with the heavy sigh of metal that has made up its mind. The Caxton shed armor like a molting beetle and let the slabs hang in a chain on hard lines, a curtain of iron and intent. The dows pulled them taut at the ends. A wall made of patient days and plate steel swung between living flesh and a kitchen. The Dominion shot again. The chain rang like a bell. The wheel did not burn. Char growled in derision and ordered his brood to spread and come around the shield's end. He did not think to look up. The tugs had rocks hung above the wheel, tethered and ready. Not weapons, never call them that. They were roofing tiles for a day when the sky decided to leak. "Bring Junie down," the Gertrude Stein called. "Easy, let her sit," thrusters whispered. Cables sang. The rock settled into place above the ring like a hand. Shots meant for glass and laundry struck stone and dissolved into light. "Bring Max," came the next call, and then Raphael and Kit, the names drifting down from the notch of the lane like small miracles disguised as good planning. The wheel tucked under its improvised roof. The monks carried soup up the central corridor in pots that never cooled. "Sanctuary held," Char snarled. "Board her." Broodcraft peeled off and dove for the wheel's service locks. "Brace," said Brother Para, setting his bowl down and picking up a pry bar that had opened 1,000 crates and only one skull long ago. "Doors are lies if you forget what walls are for." On the inner ring, the abbot's bell hung from a spar of salvaged aluminium stamped with a shipyard's name. He struck it once. Its sound ran all the way along the wheel and out into the lanes. The abbot did not pray for victory. He prayed for manners. In the human flotilla, pilots strapped in and went where they had always known they would one day go into a space they loved, so much they would accept having their names scraped from it if that meant one more child on a laundry. Line would live long enough to complain about homework. They did not say words like hero aloud. They said lane speeds like grace before a meal. One of them was Marta Greeley, her left hand a prosthetic built by a woman who liked black tea and made skills sing through steel. Marta checked her seals and her little fighter's fuel, and the photograph taped to the dash that showed a wide field and a dog with one ear up and one ear down. She breathed out. "Remember your rule," her crew chief said in her ear. He sounded like a father who would not stand between her and a choice. "If you can go slow enough to be kind," Marta said, and smiled. "Go slow enough to be kind." She slipped her ship through the curtain of plates and parked it in a ridiculous place no manual would sanction, nose to nose with a Dominion boarding skiff at a lock hatch. The trap began the way all clever traps do, quietly and with the illusion of choice. Ambassador Evelyn Hayes was never late. Her schedule was measured in seconds, her words in heartbeats. She moved through the orbital hangar with the poise of someone who had faced rooms colder than vacuum. Around her, engineers saluted. Pilots nodded. The hum of the Solace shuttle was soft, reassuring, like a heartbeat behind glass. She didn't know, not yet, that death was waiting behind that hum. 3 Dominion infiltrators had boarded the shuttle hours before. They weren't soldiers, they were specialists. Skinners, the kind that carved ships open from the inside. They'd studied human airframes, mimicked oxygen breathers, learned the cadence of Terran speech. One of them even wore a smile. They were under Shar's command, operating under orders that were supposed to humiliate, not annihilate. "Bring her alive," Shar had said. "Let them see her captured. Let them come for her, and then we end their myth." The infiltrators were efficient. They bypassed seals, replaced one service drone with a mimic, seeded nanoweave through the shuttle's vent system. Every motion was rehearsed, and when the shuttle undocked, it carried more than crew and cargo. It carried the spark of a galactic wildfire. The Dominion strike fleet waited at the edge of Sol system, cloaked in a shroud of mirrored space. Rear Admiral Cortez had expected something. Her instincts, honed by years of war, never let her sleep easily. But she hadn't expected this. The enemy's patience. For 3 full days, they didn't attack. They simply watched. "They're waiting for something," Commander Haruto muttered. "But for what?" Cortez stared at the nav feed, her fingers tightening around the rail. "For us to make the first mistake." And then, at 1403 Terran Standard, the distress beacon from the Solace erupted. Static, then screaming, then silence. Cortez froze. Every ship in orbit went quiet, like the whole Armada was holding its breath. "Trace that signal," she ordered. "Already trying," Haruto said. "But Admiral, it's moving." She looked up sharply. "Moving?" "Yes, it's in a relay chain, bouncing across systems. It's luring us." On the other side of the galaxy, aboard the Dominion flagship Kreshtar, Shar smiled with his entire mouth, a forest of razored teeth. "The beacon worked," his lieutenant said, trembling with awe. "They'll come. They always come." "Of course they will," Shar replied. "It's their weakness, their flaw. They love too loudly." He watched the holographic projection, a small, captured shuttle drifting under the Dominion crest, sealed in his hangar bay like a trophy. Evelyn Hayes sat in the center of it, bound by light cords, eyes half closed. "Not afraid, not pleading." Shar leaned forward. "She's smaller than I imagined." "Humans always are," the lieutenant said. "No," Shar murmured. "Not when they stand together." He pressed a claw against the glass. "This time, we break them." When the human fleet received confirmation that the ambassador was alive and captured, Earth Command issued a single code word that hadn't been used in over a century. Project Stoneveil. The meaning was simple. If one of us falls, none of us sleep. Within hours, the Terran fleet began to move. Hundreds of ships, cruisers, frigates, gunships, tugs, all pivoted in silence toward the coordinates the Dominion had sent as bait. The galaxy watched with morbid fascination. The Council issued public statements of regret and concern. Secretly, many thought it was over. Earth couldn't fight the Dominion head-on. Not at that scale, But humanity had never fought wars by scale, they fought by story. At the heart of the fleet, Cortez stood in the command deck of the Anatolia. Her reflection floated above a holographic sphere, the Dominion stronghold at Kreshtar. She studied it quietly. It wasn't fear that crossed her face. It was recognition. "They've made one mistake," she said finally. "What's that?" Haruto asked. "They think they can hold a human and keep the sky." She turned to her comms officer. "Signal the fleet." "Yes, Admiral." "Message?" Her voice didn't rise, didn't shake. "We retrieve our own." The assault began with light, not weapons. Light. Hundreds of human ships blinked into Dominion space in silent, synchronized bursts, like the flare of candles being lit in the dark. They didn't fire. Not yet. They deployed probes, small silvery orbs scattering in every direction like drops of quicksilver. To Dominion sensors, they looked harmless until the orbs started singing, a low-frequency resonance designed not to damage but to confuse. Every Dominion scanner, every targeting array, every organic ship brain began to misread distance. 10 meters became 10 kilometers. Enemy signatures doubled, split, vanished. Shar's fleet fired blindly, hundreds of beams slicing through empty void. The humans stayed silent, invisible, patient. And then Cortez gave the order. Strike. From the void, the Anatolia emerged first, firing not at the Dominion ships, but between them. Her railguns seeded explosive dust, millions of tungsten flechettes that formed a thin, glittering web. The Dominion fleet surged forward and tore itself apart. Their own plasma fire reflected off the web, folding back into their hulls. Explosions bloomed like dying stars. The humans didn't cheer. They didn't stop. They just moved. Each Terran ship advanced in sequence, formation after formation, overlapping shields creating an invisible corridor through which rescue craft could pass. Inside that corridor was one ship smaller than the rest, the Arcadia. A stealth corvette with a single mission, retrieve Ambassador Hayes. Inside the Dominion flagship, alarms screamed, shields failing. Hull breaches on decks 12 through... Shar silenced the officer with a backhand. "Focus on the prison bay! Kill her if they breach it!" But Evelyn Hayes had already decided she wouldn't be killed by anyone. She'd been listening. Every Dominion ship's comm carried a faint, rhythmic pulse, a pattern of interference too deliberate to be random. She knew what it meant. The humans were here. When the lights flickered, she leaned back, smiled faintly, and whispered to the guard beside her, "Do you hear that?" The guard blinked, confused. "Hear what?" The sound of a door opening. A moment later, the bay wall exploded inward. The Arcadia's Marines flooded in, armored in matte black, silent as ghosts. One of them pulled off his helmet. "Ambassador Hayes, we're here to extract you." She stood up, brushed the dust off her sleeve, and said, "Took you long enough." They cut her bonds. One Marine handed her a comm line. "Cortez," she said, voice steady. "Tell Shar to prepare for guests." The Marine stared at her. "Ma'am, that's technically what we're doing." Hayes smiled slightly. "No, Lieutenant." "We're the invitation." Shar watched from the bridge as human ships pierced through his defenses, small, coordinated, relentless. He saw one destroyer ram into a dreadnought and detonate its reactor point blank. He saw two more human frigates form a barrier around a retreating corvette, burning themselves alive to keep its engines intact. He'd studied them, feared them, mocked them, but now he understood them. They didn't fight to win, they fought to come home, and for that, they would destroy gods. The Arcadia blasted free of the Dominion flagship, engines roaring, hull shaking. Behind it, the Anatolia fired a final salvo, not to destroy but to seal the hangar doors, trapping Shar's fleet inside their own base. Cortez watched the sensors as the Arcadia cleared the gravity well. "Ambassador secured," Haruto said. His voice cracked. "She's safe," Cortez nodded once. "Signal the retreat. All units burn for Sol." "But Admiral, what about the Dominion fleet?" Cortez turned to him, eyes hard as iron. "They'll remember this day longer than they'll remember surviving it." She switched her comm to fleet-wide. "This is Admiral Cortez. To every ship, every crewman, every soul who fought today, humanity's armada does not conquer. We end nightmares." Outside, the Dominion station began to crumble, its own weapons imploding from feedback loops, its living metal howling into silence. And for the first time in recorded history, the Dominion retreated. In the weeks that followed, every star nation replayed the footage, the moment when the human armada filled the skies, the moment a captured diplomat walked free from the jaws of an empire, the moment the galaxy learned that small did not mean weak, and the moment the Council, silent for so long, realized the balance of power had shifted forever. On Earth, Hayes stood before a monument carved from salvaged hull plating. The names of every fallen ship shimmered under sunlight. Cortez stood beside her, arms crossed, quiet. "Do you think they'll come again?" Hayes asked. Cortez nodded slowly. "They will. Arrogance doesn't die easily, and when they do," Cortez smiled faintly, "then the skies will fill again." Above them, hundreds of Terran ships hung in the atmosphere, formation perfect, hulls gleaming like mirrors of dawn. Every sensor in the galaxy could see them. Every empire that had ever laughed at the name Earth could see them. And for the first time since humanity reached the stars, no one dared to look down. Silence. That was how it began. Not the quiet of peace, but the hush that comes after thunder, when smoke still curls upward, when the stars themselves seem to lean in and listen. For the first time in generations, the galaxy looked at humanity and did not see a curiosity or a nuisance or a stubborn frontier species still smelling of soil and salt water. It saw something ancient, something dangerous, something awakened. The Dominion had been shattered. The Council was in chaos, and in the vacuum that followed, fear began to grow. Rear Admiral Leon Cortez stood in orbit above Earth, watching the home world turn beneath her, blue and alive, wrapped in streaks of white. The Anatolia's bridge was quiet. No battle chatter, no alarms. Only the sound of life support systems humming like distant surf. Commander Haruto approached, carrying a datapad heavy with reports. "The Council is calling for a ceasefire summit. Telrune wants assurances that Earth won't retaliate." Cortez didn't look away from the planet. "Assurances?" she said softly. "They burned our colonies. They kidnapped our ambassador. They murdered civilians. And now they want to talk about peace?" Haruto hesitated. "Yes, Admiral. Because now they're afraid." She turned then, and for a moment the light caught her face. All sharp lines and sleepless nights. "Good," she said. "Let them be." In the great halls of the Galactic Council, the atmosphere was brittle. Delegates from 100 worlds gathered under the mirrored dome, voices low, eyes darting toward the empty human seat at the center. Sarath Kor, the crystalline chancellor, sat still as a monument. He had seen empires rise and fall, yet he could not shake the memory of that sky filled with Terran ships, a storm that had obeyed no command but its own. He broke the silence. "If humanity does not attend this assembly, there will be no accord. We must send envoys. We must show goodwill." Across the chamber, the Drethi ambassador hissed. "Goodwill? Toward them? They dismantled a Dominion fortress in a single night. They humiliated our fleets. They will not stop." "They will," Kor said, "if they have reason to." "Reason?" the Drethi sneered. "You cannot reason with fire." Kor's voice hardened, faint cracks forming along his crystalline frame. "Then perhaps it is time we learned how not to burn." When the humans finally arrived, they didn't send soldiers. They sent civilians, scientists, farmers, builders. And at the center of them all, Ambassador Evelyn Hayes walked in calm and unarmed. The chamber fell silent as she took her place before the council podium. Her hair was streaked with gray now, her uniform plain. She carried no datapad, no entourage, only her voice. "Before you ask for peace," she began, "you should know what you're asking for." Her words fell softly, but the air grew heavy. "For centuries, you've looked at us and seen children with guns. You thought we'd grow tired, kneel, learn to obey. But humanity does not kneel. We build, we break, we bury our dead and rise again, harder to kill each time. She paused, gaze sweeping across the alien faces, scaled, feathered, luminous, mechanical. We didn't fight this war for power. We fought it for the right to exist without permission. Whispers rippled through the chamber, but no one interrupted her. When your fleets came, we bled. When your armies took our colonies, we buried the fallen with their boots on. When you captured me, she smiled faintly, we learned how far the galaxy's cruelty could stretch, and we found out what we were willing to become to stop it. Silence again. Then, softly, almost kindly, she said, You have forgotten what fear feels like. We have not. Later, when the council recessed, Sareth Kor approached her privately. His crystalline frame reflected her weary face in 1,000 tiny refractions. You do not want peace, he said quietly. Hayes shook her head. You're wrong, we do. We always have. Then what do you want? She looked out at the galaxy map projected across the chamber wall. All those stars, all those borders. We want you to understand that peace is not granted by the powerful. It's enforced by those who refuse to die quietly. In the following months, the galaxy shifted. The Dominion, leaderless and broken, collapsed into infighting. The Council fractured, half its members advocating unity, half preparing for the next war. And humanity began to change. The Terran Defense Armada disbanded most of its offensive wings. Its fleets turned outward, not to conquer, but to guard the edges, patrol the lanes, rescue stranded vessels, clear pirate nests, and protect colonies that had once mocked them. They became the galaxy's silent watchmen. At first, the Council dismissed it as propaganda, but slowly, one by one, the messages began to arrive. A Drethi freighter saved from a collapsing jump gate. A Varnix medical ship defended from raiders. A Torga colony evacuated from a dying star. And each time, the rescuers left behind a single calling card, a small silver emblem depicting a circle of stars crossed by a line of flame. Below it, just 3 words, Earth remembers friends. Shar survived, barely. His flagship, cracked open and adrift, had been found by scavengers and rebuilt, piece by piece. He wandered the empty lanes for years, haunted by the memory of the human fleet. He had seen war. He had seen gods die. But what he'd seen that night, the quiet, relentless fury of a species united by loss, that had changed something in him. When his ship finally returned to Dominion space, he found no empire waiting, only ruins. He stood in the dust of what had been a throne world and whispered, We were the fire. They were the forge. Then, with a strange peace in his chest, he turned his ship toward Sol. Not to fight, to apologize. Earth accepted him. It didn't need to, but it did. He was brought to a rebuilt Geneva, where the skyline shimmered with orbiting vessels like a crown of stars. Evelyn Hayes met him on the balcony overlooking Lake Lemuria. She poured him tea, though his species couldn't drink it. He said, I came expecting death. She smiled. You expected wrong. Shar bowed his head. Why? Because we remember what it's like to be feared for what you were, not what you are. He looked at her for a long time, then at the sky. And what are you now? Hayes followed his gaze upward, where hundreds of Terran ships moved silently in formation, escorting traders, guiding refugees, watching the borders of known space. What we've always been, she said. A reminder? Years passed. The Council reformed into something smaller, humbler. Each world was given equal voice, not by tradition, but by earned trust. And in the center of that alliance stood Earth, not as ruler, not as conqueror, but as guardian. They called the new era the Covenant of the Sky. At its founding, the first Terran fleet commander addressed the assembly. His words were brief, carried to every ship, every station, every colony that had ever known war. We are no one's masters. We are no one's slaves. We are the light that moves between. Generations later, in the archives of the Moon Titan, children studied the recordings of that first war. They watched the moment the Terran Armada filled the skies, ships layered upon ships, stretching into infinity. A teacher asked, why did they fight? A young student raised her hand and said, because someone took one of them. And why did the galaxy fear them? The girl smiled. Because they never forgot who they were fighting for. The stars outside the classroom shimmered, reflected on Titan's ice plains like 1,000 tiny fires. And somewhere in those fires, in the void between worlds, the fleet still moved, quiet, eternal, unbroken. No banners, no anthems, just that same silent promise echoing across time. If you touch one of us, you'll see the sky burn again. And the galaxy believed it. Because once, long ago, they had seen it happen. And they would never forget the day humanity filled the heavens, not with rage, but with remembrance.